right? But people who do feel burnout don't feel like they're burnt out at work and then they get home and they're like, everything is great and they're happy go lucky with the rest of their family. It completely leaks into every aspect of people's lives. And, this negative piece of it really kind of spills over into your home, your work, your social life. It can cause long-term changes to your body. It makes you vulnerable to illnesses, right? And the effects of burnout just don't stop when you leave work every day, right? They are the type of thing that really impacts people. Gallup, during their studies over the last 4 years around burnout, came up with the statistic that people who consider themselves burned out, if they feel like they're a burned out employee, that they are 23% more likely to visit the emergency room, right? That was huge to me, right? 23% more likely to visit the emergency room. And also that people who are burnt out are 63% more likely to take a sick day, which makes sense, right? Because when we're feeling burned out, the last thing we want to do is show up back at the place that is making us feel that way. So let's talk about some of the causes of burnout. And so we're going to talk about them from two different places. One, I'm going to talk about them from Gallup and the research they did, and then also from the Mayo Clinic, because I think both of them are similar, but they're also a little bit different. Gallup came up with these being their top 5 causes of burnout for folks, right? The first being unfair treatment at work. People who feel like they are treated unfairly at work, they say are 2.3 times more likely to experience the highest levels of burnout. It's this idea of that there being favoritism in the workplace or mistreatment by a coworker, or inconsistently applied compensation or corporate policies really kind of leads to this feeling of burnout. The next thing Gallup found was this idea of an unmanageable workload, right? Folks who feel like they have way too much to do, right? That they are doing the jobs of multiple people are 2.2 times more likely to say they have burnout. Again, not surprising to most of us. I think of folks that I've coached over the past year who tell me that when they quit their job, all of a sudden their employer replaced them with 2 or 3 people, right? This idea that they have had a completely unmanageable workload. And the thing that's interesting is that what the research has shown us is that it's not just that you have a lot of tasks to do, but it's actually how you experience your workload, right? That when folks have some flexibility in their ability of when and how they do their work, they are much less likely to then experience burnout, even though they might work the same amount of long hours as someone. The next one was unclear communication from managers, right? Not being able to get the right information from the manager that you need, not being able to kind of be told kind of what it is that you need to do and what your goals are. The next one is lack of support from a manager, right? That employees who feel like they are supported by their manager are 70% less likely to experience burnout. And supportive managers are usually, it comes into things like these are managers who are helping their staff grow. They listen to the needs of their staff. They help encourage people move forward. And the last one that causes burnout for most people is this idea of unreasonable time pressure, right? So when you're able to figure out when you do your work and how you do your work, you're much less likely to feel burnout. But this idea when there are these overly aggressive timelines and then you fall behind on one thing and that snowball effect is really a huge, huge, huge part of burnout. So the Mayo Clinic had pretty similar things that they found kind of contributed to burnout for folks. A few different, right? It's this idea of lack of control over work decisions. I think this goes into some of that flexibility as well. Some sort of dysfunctional workplace practices. I saw a few folks on here who put things like micromanager, global schedules, no support, right? All of those things that go into this kind of dysfunctional workplace dynamic. Unclear job expectations, never knowing if you're actually doing a good job because no one has told you exactly what it is you're supposed to do. Lack of social support, right? This one came up a lot during COVID, of this idea of not feeling like you had friends at work, of not having those connections at work. Like those pieces were really hard for folks. The other one that I thought was really interesting that the Mayo Clinic points out are jobs that have the extremes of activity. That when you're really, really, really busy for periods of time, and then you kind of have lower times, and you have really busy times and lower times, that actually causes more burnout than jobs that feel like they're more steady, that happen year round. So those are some of the causes that are out there. We are now going to focus the rest of our time on 5 things that you can do that will limit the effects of burnout for you and try to help you kind of move forward with them. So we're going to talk about one, kind of the acknowledgement of it, figuring out that you actually are feeling burnout, and figuring out how you can know and use your strengths every day, how to talk to your boss about it, how to say no, and then how to legitimately take a break. Right? Thinking of all of the things that people have been dropping in the chat, right? Feeling too exhausted to initiate de-stressing techniques, right? Lack of follow-up from others, micromanagers, bad managers, too much to do, no support to pass things off to, right? Can't replace team members who've left. That's been a huge issue during the past few months, right? With this idea of the great resignation that people are talking about, right? People are quitting jobs and companies aren't able to or aren't willing to replace them. Right? Too many things to do, unrealistic demands, right? That idea of on call 24/7, that need to be on all the time, right? Or to kind of be having to fit in the office a certain way, right? These things really cause to burnout. So we're going to do kind of this little assessment here of figuring out what level, kind of where you are with burnout. So having a sister who is a social worker, it makes me instantly want to say, so this is not a clinical test. This is a kind of simple, fun little quiz for us to figure out your level, right? I kind of pulled these from a whole bunch of different quizzes out there. There is an actual clinical test for figuring out burnout that can be administered by somebody who has a clinical license, and that is not me. So there's my little asterisk today. For any of you who did download the handout that I sent over, this little quiz is on there. It is the first page of it, so you can follow along there. But for the rest of you, just grab a pen and kind of figure out your score. So when I read you a statement, you're going to say, is this you never, rarely, sometimes, often, or all of the time? So the first statement is, I feel run down and drained physically. So how often are you feeling run down and drained physically? Next is, I feel run down and drained emotionally. Number 3 is, I am easily irritated by small problems. Number 4 is, I am easily irritated by my coworkers. Number 5, I feel like I am in the wrong career, industry, job, company for myself. Number 6, I feel overwhelmed at work. Number 7, I have very little patience for my coworkers. Number 8, I have trouble making decisions at work. Number 9, I lose my concentration when working on tasks. And number 10, I have trouble sleeping and or relaxing. So add up your score and let us know how you scored, right? 10 to 15, you probably have little, no burnout. 16 to 25, a little bit. 26 to 35, you're pretty much at risk. 36 to 42, severe risk. And 43 plus, you are at the very severe risk of burnout at this moment. So we'll give folks a minute or so here to throw their answers in the poll. All right, give another couple of seconds here for folks to be able to add their numbers up. All right, share the results here. Okay, so one person here today has no signs of burnout, so we applaud you and good for you for being the person who is taking care of yourself right now, right? And right, the majority of folks are in that kind of at risk for burnout at the moment. Right, some folks were at the severe risk and some were at the very severe risk. So, right, if you're in that kind of severe risk and very severe risk, like you are the folks who hopefully today will come up with some ideas and really be able to kind of take a step back, take some breaks and kind of get yourself in a place that you're not feeling such an intense level of burnout. Okay. So, right, step one here is this idea of acknowledging that you have this feeling of burnout, right? Once you kind of realize that you have burnout, then we have to figure out some ways to do something about it. So, right, the first one I will say is being someone who uses the Clifton Strengths Assessment, right? This is where I kind of go and where I do most of my training and work. Strong believer in Clifton Strengths is that people who focus on their strengths are actually 57% less likely to experience frequent burnout, right? If you're able to actually do the things that you do well, right? If you are able to have the opportunity to tap into your strengths every day, you are going to be more engaged in your job. You're going to be more effective. You're going to feel less stressed and more focused because you're going to be doing your best work rather than seeing your job as a burden, right? When you're able to kind of focus on your strengths, you're able to kind of take that lens and put it towards your work. So you can do things the way that makes sense to you and the way that kind of gives you energy. I always talk about when I'm working with folks, with groups of folks with StrengthsFinder, that when you use your strengths every day, you feel energized at the end of the day, right? Even if you've done really hard work, you leave work and you're like ready to go do something else. You gain energy from your job and the work that you do because you're able to kind of apply your strengths to it. On the other hand, when you're doing a job where you don't get to apply your strengths, right, you start to feel drained every day. Right. And you get to the point where, right, you leave work and you just want to go sit on the couch and watch 20 episodes of the next Netflix thing. Right. So thinking about it from that perspective, right, people who are able to kind of focus on their strengths also, right, have things like 6 times more engagement in their jobs. It's like they have 20% more productivity in their jobs, which is why employers like this stuff. Right. There's 81% lower absenteeism in companies that use strengths on a regular basis, right? 81%, right? That is huge. It is a very large number, right? Which tells us that people who get to use their strengths are feeling better, both mentally and physically. I do have a picture of the book there, right? This book, Wellness at Work, Wellbeing at Work. It's a fairly recent book by Gallup. I get nothing if you buy this, but what I will say is that when you learn your strengths, in the appendix of this book is it goes through every strength and it talks about what you can do from a career standpoint with your particular strength that will help you be less burnt out and have better well-being at work. It is definitely my favorite book. If you haven't done the StrengthsFinder assessment, it does come with a code in the back to take it. So I highly, highly recommend this. This past week, it was on sale at Amazon for, I think, $14. So I bought 5 of them because I love giving them as gifts. So I highly recommend it. I really do believe that when people are able to tap in their strengths, they do feel better about the work that they are doing. All right. The next thing that you can do if you are one of those folks who is at this risk for burnout or high risk for burnout, or you really are experiencing burnout, is to actually go have a conversation with your boss, right? Talk to them and let them know. Now, if you have a really good boss, they probably are not going to be surprised by this because they've probably tapped into the idea that you are feeling stressed and burnt out at this point. But for some of you, this might be the first time that your boss realizes that you were at risk for burning out. Now, in this moment where it is hard to hire good people, it's hard to replace people, people want higher employee retention. So a good boss is going to spend that time to talk to you to figure out how do we keep you and how do we figure it out for you. So before you go in and actually have a conversation with someone about this, have a plan in place and have a few options for what would actually help you, right? Going into your boss and saying, I'm feeling really burned out and I have no idea what to do is probably not, they're probably not going to be able to help you. Or just going in and complaining and saying, I'm feeling really burned out because I have too much work, take some of my work away, is probably not going to help you. So go in and have a few ideas in mind, right? Come in with solutions to show your manager that you really want to take some action. I like starting the conversation with something along the lines of, right, I've been feeling really burned out lately. I have some ideas that would help me get back to being a better contributor to the team, right? Or maybe it's, right, I've been feeling a real sense of burnout and I want to see what my options are to refresh my mind so I can keep contributing to the best of my ability. Both of those statements are on the handout for you as good starting points. But when you think about what are some of the things that you might need to help with burnout, so thinking of things like flexibility, right? Study after study shows us that when employees are in charge of their time and that have a little bit more control over things like their start time and their end time, and right, having some flexibility during the day makes a huge difference in whether or not they get these feelings of burnout. During COVID, we've seen over and over again that most times when people are working from home, they're actually putting in more hours and doing more work than they are in the office, but feeling less sense of burnout because they have more control over that, right? The ability to do things like take a webinar at lunch or throw a load of laundry in between meetings, right? I think for myself, just simple things like prepping dinner at some point during the day when I have 15 minutes between meetings, right? Going and making a salad just makes things easier. You might need to ask for some better communication from your manager. You might say, right, part of what's causing me burnout is being really unclear about what it is that I need to do. And so making sure that you figure out a way to have better communication. Maybe you need things sent to you in an email versus on the Teams chat. Or maybe, right, somebody telling you something passing in a meeting isn't really going to help you, but instead you really need someone who is going to spend the time to send you that email to figure it out. Coming up with reasonable timelines, right? Just because someone comes to you and says, I really need this by Tuesday, it doesn't always necessarily mean that they do need it by Tuesday, right? You can question timelines and say, is this really the time frame that this needs to be done in? Is this a real kind of timeline, or is this a artificially made timeline? Right, there are times that they are real timelines. If you have an event on Thursday, you can't decide to make the name tags on Friday, right? There is a real actual time frame for that. But figuring out, are there things that they can be some more reasonable timelines put in place? Office space. Interestingly, if you kind of do some of this research, one of the things the Mayo Clinic found, and Gallup both, was that people who had the right lighting in their office space had less burnout. People who had plants in their office space, people who had the ability to shut a door, Now, I know that not every workplace is going to be able to give every person their own four-walled office with a door, right? That is not a reasonable thing for every job out there. But to have some space that you can go to decompress that is by yourself is really good in a workplace and does help with the sense of feeling burned out. But also, like I said, good lighting, plants, windows, like those are things. I mean, you can't put a window in your office, but you can get better lighting, right? You can bring a plant in, right? Those are things that actually make people have a less sense of feeling burnt out in the office. Consistency of work. I know I've had jobs in the past that are roller coaster rides, right? That it was like busy season was 10 months out of the year with like week breaks in between. And so it was this kind of crazy roller coaster sometimes. I've had other jobs where we had two really busy times of the year. Now, is there a way for you to look at that work and try to spread it out a little more evenly, right? Doing some of the preparation so it's not feeling so much highs and lows, because the highs and lows really do contribute to a sense of burnout for most people. And the last one is time off. And we're going to talk about that in our last bullet here when we talk about the need to take a break and how that really will contribute to lessening your burnout. The next one here is this idea of learning to say no, right? Knowing your limits, knowing when you need to say no to something. And it's interesting, right? Because saying no is hard for many of us. So one, I want you to always think about when someone asks you to do something, what are you giving up every time you say yes to that, right? Because you're giving up something, right? Because if you say yes to being on the board of a nonprofit, right, that time is getting taken away from you could be doing something else. So everything you say yes to is you saying no to something else. So really think about for yourself, what are you giving up every time you say yes? Now, if it is a work piece, right, and a supervisor or someone is asking you to do something, to be able to turn around and say, you know, hey, Laura, thanks for giving me this task, but these are my current priorities and they are taking all of my time. What is it that I should be giving up in order to say yes to this? In order for me to accomplish this other thing that you have just asked me to do, what is it that I should be giving up to do that? And part of that is really making sure that your supervisor knows, right, that you're at capacity and that by taking on this other thing, something else has to drop, right? There are only so many hours in the day. There are only so many hours that you can actually do work. So really think about, what are you giving up every time you say yes? So think about the ways that you can say no. For most of us, saying no to something is a little bit tricky, right? It is not something that we are easily able to kind of walk in the room and be like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that for you, right? That either it's coming from a manager, it's coming from a supervisor, or you're thinking, if I say no to this, maybe I won't get the promotion this year, right? There are lots of things that add into this. So thinking about how you approach it when someone asks you if you can do something. And so I love, someone just dropped in the chat that saying that telling people it's best practice for you to say no is great, right? So that's a great way to do it as well, right? It doesn't send the message that you're simply lazy. It shows that you're being responsible. And I think that's what you want to get at. So that's a great take on this, Julia, right? So one of the things I love to do is think of when somebody asks you to do something, when at all possible, if you can say, right, let me think about this. Let me think this through. Can we talk this through? Right? So if someone says, hey, can you take on this other writing assignment? Okay, so let's talk this through. And then you can talk about, right now, my priority is XYZ, right? Right now, this is my priority. And if I take on this additional writing project, which becomes my priority, right? Sometimes you can come back and say, right, I'm not able to do this right now. Right. I have a huge event coming up next weekend. I just can't take on this additional work right at this moment. And the last one that I always love, to add is the statement of the idea of, well, can we find a workaround for this? Is there some other way that we can accomplish it? How else can we accomplish this particular task? And some of it really is for you to think about, if you take on this task, is it going to negatively impact the other things that you are supposed to be doing? Right? So it shows that you are being responsible as you kind of talk through this and think about it, and that you're really saying, this is the priority. This is what my main job is right now. And it's a little tricky for me to take on this other piece. Anybody have any other ideas on, or any suggestions on how they have been able to say no to something? You can drop it in the chat or come off mute if you have a way that you have figured out how to say no successfully. With Clifton Strengths, one of the strengths out there is responsibility, right? And quite often with responsibility, people have responsibility, right? They are the ones who want to say yes to things all the time. And it gets a little tricky for them. And so one of the assignments I give folks who have high responsibility as a strength is I give them the assignment of coming up with 25 different ways that they can respond when someone asks them to do something. Right? Oh, Laura just dropped one in too, right? Thank you for the opportunity. Right now, it's not a good fit for me, right? So many different ways that you can do this. If saying no is a struggle for you, on that handout, I put 5 kind of open slots for you to put 5 different ways that you could say no. Right? So somebody else suggested you can state that this, that the project can be completed in 2 weeks. Dawn says she's very comfortable asking which items are priority, right? That is such a good skill to have, to be able to say which is the priority, which do you really need me to do? But getting comfortable saying no is going to really help. Now, we've all had bosses at some point in our lives that will not take no for an answer. And I think that's where Dawn's example of where you're able to really come back and say, okay, great. I get that we have this other thing to do. Help me figure out the priority, because there's just no possible way for me to complete any more work in the time frame, right? Okay, so the last one here is this idea of taking a break. Now, quite often when people have so much to do on their plate and their to-do list is a mile long, their initial reaction to that is to double down and work really hard and make a giant to-do list and check everything off and really get going. And I have found in all of my coaching that it's almost the opposite of what people need to do. When you have hit that moment of overwhelm, when you've hit that point that there is way too much work and not enough time in the day to do it, what you actually need is to step away, right? Is to step away and take a break. Now, maybe this break is 15 minutes that you walk away from your desk. Maybe you are so kind of stressed out at the moment that at least getting up and going to the bathroom feels like a break. If that is the case, right? To make everything every time you step away from your desk, add 30 seconds to it. So if you get up and go to the bathroom, wash your hands for an extra 30 seconds. Not because I care about the cleanliness of your hands, but give yourself a 30-second break from going back to your desk, right? If you can, if you have hit this feeling of total overwhelm, it is time to take some time off. I will say a number of people that I coach, I will do calls with them the day before they leave for vacation, because I have seen so many people give up vacations or work on vacation because they have hit this feeling of overwhelm. And what I actually think you need is to step back and actually take some time to decompress, right? To get some perspective, to be able to take a moment to say, is this something that I really need to do? And kind of figure that out. Now, I am like Dig Paul put it into that he is the to-do list checklist person. I am that person as well. If you saw my desk right now, I have a checklist here and a different checklist here. Right? I love my checklists. And so in those cases, what I usually start with is go to your checklist. And I think when people are feeling overwhelmed, they're like, how many things can I quickly get off my checklist? Right? How many can I do? I suggest people actually go to their checklist and try to knock off 5 things that you actually don't need to do. I think quite often we get things that we add to our to-do list that we don't actually need to do. So give yourself that moment to look at that and figure out, to say, are there things that I can get off this? I did that exercise with somebody recently, and I started asking her how long every item had been on the checklist. A great kind of best practice I find with folks who are checklist people is to actually put the date that you put the item on your checklist. Not the date it's due, but the date you put it on. And if something's been on your checklist for a month, it's time to take a step back and say, like, does this really need to happen? Because if it's already been a month, you probably or quite possibly don't actually have to do it during this period of overwhelm. Oh, and Debbie, I love that when you told your manager you were burning out, they told you to take the time off. So, right, auto reply email when you're out of the office, right? So saying things like, please email after this date if your matter requires my attention, as opposed to that you'll respond to every single one. So, right, thinking of different ways to do this. So we have about 5 minutes left today on our webinar. And so I will say I am not a huge meditation person, but the coach that I use always ends all of our sessions with a quick 3 to 5 minute guided meditation. And I will say it does kind of help to kind of relax me for a moment. And so we are going to end with about a 3-minute meditation here. And if you're someone who is rolling your eyes when I say that, bear with me and just try it for once. And Michelle, I do want to acknowledge that, sometimes the difficulty of taking time off seems to exacerbate that. You come back and all of a sudden there is more work. And I think people get such a fear for that they don't take the vacation. And so it is important to kind of rejuvenate and to come back and see, what do you actually have to deal with, right? That happened while you were gone. Did people handle some things as well? So yes, and Daniel dropped in that he uses Headspace for daily meditation. I use Insight Timer and love it. So I think they're both very similar, but I'm going to talk us through one. I do have one from Insight Timer. There is a specific one that is on, it's one of the free ones you can use on Insight Timer as well. So you don't have a subscription, that is specifically on burnout. So it is a 10-minute burnout meditation that I highly recommend. But I would love to do this quick 3-minute, let's take some deep breaths kind of moment before you go back to work, and see if even just 3 minutes of doing this makes you feel just a little bit better. So I'd like everyone to take a second, get comfortable in whatever chair you're in. I know some people like to get up and lay down on the ground, right? Get into your comfy place. And let's begin by taking a deep breath in and slowly let it out through your mouth. Deep breath in. Pause at the top and then let it out. Do a couple of more deep breaths. And, it's important to really think about this, because burnout tends to meet us quite often when we are moving just too fast for too long, right? It shows up when we're doing too much, and typically doing too much for others, even despite the negative effects it might have on us. And we tend to then go into a reactive mode and not take the time to fill ourselves. So for the next 2 or 3 minutes or so, I want you to rethink, right? There's no expectations, no deadlines, nothing but you and your chance to just take a break for a few minutes. So if you're comfortable, right, sit back, close your eyes, bring your attention to your breath. Breathe in through your nose. Let it out slowly through your mouth. Another deep breath in through your nose. Let it out slowly through your mouth. So as you continue to breathe, take a moment to notice what's happening to your body, right? Are you experiencing any tension in one particular area, right? As you breathe in, think about your head, your neck, your shoulders. Bring it down to your torso, your back, your hips. If you're feeling tension in a particular area, give it a little wiggle or a little movement. See if you can relax it a little bit. Pay attention to your arms, your elbow, your fingers. Feel your legs. Pay attention to your knees and your calves and your ankles. And with a couple of last deep breaths, I want you to try to release all the tension that is in there, all of the overwhelm, all of the burnout. Take a deep breath in. Pause at the top. Let it out. One last time. Breathe in deep through your nose. Hold it at the top. Breathe out. All right, and take a moment now to go back to how your regular breathing is. You can wiggle your fingers, wiggle your toes, kind of come back from our quick little 3-minute meditation that hopefully slowed you down a little bit, gave you a little sense of relaxation. Right, and as you move through the rest of your day and you start to feel really stressed, even taking a minute to stop, pause, and breathe for just a minute can be helpful. Like I said, I did post the one insight timer meditation there that is specifically around burnout that I really enjoy listening to. I highly recommend that one. I will send that out as well in the follow-up email. So as we end, I want you to think about, is there one thing that you can do over the next week to decrease your level of burnout, right? What is the thing that you could do next week that could kind of help put a pause button on this level of burnout that you have, right? Is it scheduling a break for yourself, scheduling a vacation day where you're not planning to spend the day cleaning out your kitchen cabinets, but you're legitimately going to do something that you enjoy for the day, right? Or is it that you just need a day that you're going to sit on the couch and watch 20 episodes of whatever the latest Netflix show is that you're watching, right? Just think about what is one thing that you can do. Maybe you're going to talk to your manager, ask for some clarity in some work, or you're going to figure out a way to say no to something. Maybe you don't know your strengths. You haven't done the StrengthsFinder assessment. You decide you're going to do that, or you're going to grab the well-being at work book and see Are there some really specific ways that you can take your strengths to that next level? So I hope you enjoyed this today. I hope you kind of feel like you got something out of this, that you came up with at least one tool that you're leaving with that would allow you to kind of decrease the effect of burnout right now in your life and how it's affecting you. I will be sending out, like I said, the handout that I had there, as well as a couple of links to some work that Gallup has done on burnout, and an additional piece on a 10-week kind of coaching circle that I'm doing starting in January that is on burnout. So we're doing a 10-week kind of burnout class. So and yes, Laura, I will send the name of the book, the StrengthsFinder book, to everybody, as well as a link to it, so you can find it. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording now, but if anyone has any questions, I am happy to stay on for a few minutes and answer any questions that you might not want to be on the recording. So the recording stopped, so happy to answer any questions or specific scenarios that folks are stuck in.